Hello, everybody, and delighted to see so many people on today. And we'll launch straight into it because I know your time is valuable. So as Angela had said, we are going to be taking a look today at how to ace your presentation. And I'm going through that acronym of ACE with regard to the best way that you can engage people, that you're looking at the audience. First of all, we're taking a look at content and what you can do there, and then finally how to have audience engagement. And starting with our audience engagement, first thing I'm going to do, if you can put your answer into the chat box on this here, but which of the options that I'm going to put up in a moment cause you to lose interest in a presentation? It could be all three of them, but which is the first one that's the real turn off for you, that you're like, I'm out of here? So is it A, that someone has poor content, B, that the speaker has poor slides, or C, that the speaker has poor delivery? And if you just pop your answer into the chat box there, and we'll get feeling as to what people feel strongest about, A, B, or C. And the answers are flying in here. So I'm seeing a mixture from what I'm seeing, getting A's, ABCs, all three from a number of them. I can see that. C seems to be the most popular choice of that from what's coming in here. Angela, would you see that as well? From what you can see.
Yeah, I think it's
C.
C
seems to be from the poor delivery. And it's interesting, the poor delivery can come about very often because a speaker is nervous or because they're not sure of their content. And beginning with getting sure in your content starts very early on in your whole planning stage. So that delivery is the final piece that's going to be put together. But if the other bits aren't in place, then the delivery can't possibly go well. So as I said, today we're going to be taking a look at three elements of it. First of all, the audience, and looking at audience analysis, why it's important and how you can actually set about that. What do I mean by audience analysis? Secondly, taking a look at that content. What are you going to include in a presentation? And then for that engagement, how do you keep people interested and involved in what's going on, what's happening? So as Angela had mentioned there, my background is teaching. I was a secondary school teacher, a high school teacher for quite a long time. And I had to make sure that I had that engagement with my students, that they were paying attention, that they were listening, and all of the techniques that were there. So when you are presenting, whether it's a small presentation to colleagues or to clients, or on a larger stage, whether that's a virtual stage or an in-person stage in conference, you need to have the different elements together to make sure that people are listening to what you're saying, that they're focused on what you're saying. And when I set up my business, then the Unlock Speaking Confidence was the tagline that I've used. And as Angela had mentioned, that I work with a number of individuals and organizations to help individuals and teams to develop those skills so that they can communicate with confidence. So one of the things that Angela has mentioned there is that there are a number of new faces on, and it's great to get to know other people in the virtual room. If you were together, you'd be chatting and getting to know new people. So we're going to set up breakout rooms for 5 minutes only, and it's just a little bit of fun, a little bit of getting to know each other. And in the breakout rooms, you're going to be in groups of 3 or 4 people for 5 minutes. And I want you in your groups to find 3 things that you have in common, and try to go for something that's a little bit unusual. So maybe not obvious like hair color or eye color, but there could be some unusual aspects that you have in common. And then choose one person who is going to just report back with, and the report back is literally telling me that we've all holidayed in Darwin, or whatever the angles are that you're after finding when you go into breakout rooms. So everybody okay on that? With thumbs up if we're all clear on what the task is. And Angela, if you're ready to set the breakout rooms there. So 5 minutes, and then you'll be popping back into the room then afterwards. So for those of you that are back, as you're back, have a think if you were able to, hopefully everybody was able to get at least one item, one thing that you have in common. If you've got 3, that's fantastic. And in the interest of saving time, rather than going around each room, anybody willing to just unmute there and share with us what you found, particularly if it's something unusual, or put it into the chat so that we can see it there. But if anybody is able to unmute, that would be great.
Okay, I can do it from our group.
Sure,
We were
thank you.
nearly all from East Star, but not all.
Okay.
So we were also from Turkey and me from Germany. And we found out that everybody was in Germany. So we have that in common. And we all love Chinese food. This is also something we have in common. And we are all INCON partners and in the same business. Okay, that's the more easier one. And we like to play on the computer games.
Brilliant, thank you. So lots of chat there. Thank you for that. Anybody else like to share what you found in common in your group?
I can go.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, so we all used to travel a lot before the pandemic. We are all from PCO. We are all exhausted from the pandemic, and we are all at this moment at home.
All at home and all exhausted from the pandemic. That's it. Oh, yeah, great. Thank you for that. One more we'll take before we move on. Anybody else like to share what you had in your group?
I can do that.
Thank you.
We have also traveling in common. We love traveling. And actually, we're all looking forward to great face-to-face meetings again. And we all agreed, and actually it was a group from Shanghai to Mexico, US and Germany, so we had quite a range. And we all agreed that we love sports around water, whether in summer water with swimming or in winter water as snow.
Great, that's super, thank you. So hopefully you enjoyed that, got to know your colleagues a little bit better as a result of that. It'd be great if you could put into chat there as well where in the world you are at the moment. So you know that myself and Angela are here in Ireland, but where else you're joining us from today, so that would be great. Moving back into our session, and we're taking a look here at what we said for our 3 parts, that audience being the first part, and how do we get audience analysis? And first of all, why do we need it? And the why we need it is because when we're starting off preparing for a speech or presentation, we need to think who is going to be in this audience, who is this presentation for? It's not for me, it's not the self-centric version, it's not me as the speaker, it's focusing on the audience. What is going to be relevant to them? What are they going to be interested in hearing? What do they need to know? So that starting off process is focusing on the audience. And I like this quote here, that the size of the audience doesn't matter. What's important is that your audience is listening. Remember back to that poll that you did at the beginning. What makes you stop listening? First of all, is it poor content? Is it poor delivery? Is it poor slides? We need to try to keep people engaged and with us all of the way through. So what do I mean by analysis? Well, we're thinking about it from a range of different headings. So looking from demographic point of view, is it, you know, what gender? Somebody had put in the chat there that it's mostly female that's on this call today. So what's the demographic? What's the age profile of the people who are going to be there? Now, you're not always going to have the answers to all of these questions, but these are things for you to have a think about when you're putting a presentation, a speech together. You know, what's the primary language of the people that are going to be listening to you, because that will determine what type of language you're using. The type of humor that you're using might not work cross-culturally. So you need to have a think about this in advance. Are there cultural differences? If it's going to be as a group, or, you know, even if it is a group of females who are all in the 30 to 50 age bracket, that doesn't mean that they're all going to have the same interests and that they're going to have the same beliefs and values and all of that. So you're thinking about from that psychological point of view as well, from what's their knowledge that they have coming into it. So if I'm delivering a very technical presentation to a technical audience, I know that they have the knowledge that I'm going to be able to use terminology that they will understand. If I'm delivering a technical presentation to a non-technical audience, I need to change my language and simplify the content so that the audience that's in front of me will understand what I'm saying. And that's all part of my audience analysis as I'm going through it. Also need to have a think about the context. So we've got people here from different parts of the world. It might be early morning for some people. It could be late in the evening. We saw somebody who's on their way home from work, or midday, like what it is more in the Europe side of things. But you know, if it's coming up to lunchtime, people could be hungry. If it's the end of the day, they could be tired. So I need to be thinking, if it's from the context side of things, where people are at, what level of information I'm giving them, what references I'm going to make, that's going to make the speech that I'm giving, the presentation that I'm giving, relevant to them. You're also thinking about, from a context point of view, why are people there? Are they choosing to be there? Or is it something that they have been told that they have to attend? Are they there by choice or not? That's going to have an impact on their attitude attending the presentation that you're delivering. You're having to think about what audience size it's going to be. If we had, you know, 100 people on a webinar here and putting them into breakout rooms and getting feedback from each breakout room, that's going to take all day. So you're thinking about all of these different elements when you're putting a presentation together. It could be any objections that people have. If you're delivering a talk on something that might be a bit more controversial, or a topic that the audience are really not in favor of, then you need to factor all of that into your planning. So that's all part of this audience analysis. It's a really important aspect. You don't have to go through every element that's there, but you have a lot of thinking about it in advance. Who's going to be there? What do they know already? What do I want them to know at the end? And how do I bridge that gap in a way that is going to make sense to them and going to be relevant to them? So how do we go about getting this analysis and getting this information? Well, first of all, it could be the event organizer. So, you know, quite a while ago when Angela was planning this, we had a call and she explained to me, you know, who's going to be attending, who the invitation is going out to, what you could be looking for when you're attending this session. So the event organizer is a good place to start. Could be doing your research as well. So if I had an idea of the type of companies, for example, that were tagged in on the LinkedIn post, so I did some research just to see, well, who are you? What's your industry? So that I had some background knowledge before I attended this. When you're setting up and people are registering, you could include questions on the registration form. So it might be that you want to find out what somebody's role is within a company, or that you've got different questions that are there that you can have a bit of audience profiling done in advance, so you know who's going to be attending. That you could inquire from previous attendees. Social media is another way. Take a look at their Twitter feed, take a look at what they're posting on LinkedIn, get some idea about the people who attend. And it can also be from at the event itself. So if you've taken a look from what we have already, from the feedback that you have, that you're currently putting into chat, where you are in the world, that's given me some information. And also even the feedback that we had from that breakout room session is giving a little bit of information about the interests that people have, or where you are in the world. I know a lot of you are working from home. You know, you're getting that information on site. If it's in a face-to-face event, it could be by chatting to some of the people as they're coming into the room. That analysis is being done, and you might tweak some of your content to focus in on the analysis. So back to what I was talking about, if it is a very technical presentation or one that's going to have a lot of facts and figures in it, for example, is this something that's going to be relevant to the audience? If I am delivering something to a mathematical based audience, to a team of accountants, people who love figures, then they're going to be really interested in that. If it's a general audience, they could be overwhelmed if there are lots of statistics and data and facts and figures. Similarly, like I mentioned earlier, for technical presentations, if there's a lot of jargon or acronyms or industry specific language that's being used, that can be a turn off for people. And we don't want to create any barriers between us and the audience. If I create a barrier, people stop listening. Remember back to what that poll was at the beginning. What makes you stop listening? What makes you tune out? When barriers are created for whatever reason. So by analyzing my audience in advance, thinking carefully about who's going to be there and what content can I deliver to them that is going to make sense for them and be relevant to them. That's my starting point. So let's take a look next at moving on to what that content is going to be. So when you've done your audience analysis, you're thinking through, okay, this is the level of information that they need. If it's a large audience and a general audience, that level of detail is going to be at a very high level. You're not going to be going granular into specific content because it's not relevant to them. You're keeping it at a high level. If it is industry specific audience, then you're going deep down because you need to show your knowledge on the topic. But whatever the content is that you're choosing to deliver, what's important is that you're going to have structure to it. So when you're putting the topic together, that if you're able to break it into three is our magic number. 3 is the smallest number that makes a pattern, and our brains like patterns. And if we have the 3, it helps to keep you on track as a speaker, and the audience can follow what it is that you're talking about. So on this particular slide here, I'm going to have 3 points. In today's session, I have my 3 main areas: the audience, the content, and the engagement, and it follows the path. And at this point, you know, she's finished talking about the audience and we're now moved on to the second one. And then there's going to be the third one, the engagement. And subconsciously, you're following that path. So it's easier for you to stay engaged and stay listening to what's going on. So a natural 3 that falls in is, you know, a story where you have got your beginning, your middle, and your end. If you're talking about giving a report on something, it could be chronological order. So you could be talking about, this was the situation in our industry before the pandemic. This is where things are now, and this is where I see things moving as we head out of the pandemic and into the future. So you have a natural progression there, and it creates that nice, easy 3. It could be that you break your segment into 3 main points. Or it could be that you've got 1 point that you're speaking about, but that you've got 3 subsections in it. But if possible, to break it into 3, it works. It works nicely. If you've got more than 3, 5 works well. 7 is getting too big a number. And we remember the 3, 5, 7, those irregular numbers more so than the even numbers. Our odd numbers tend to work better. Whatever format you're using in that, for the structure, use signposting. So at the beginning of the session here, Angela outlined to you, you know, the session was going to go on, and then we're going to have some input from you at the end, because we'd like your feedback, your thoughts on what the session is going to be. The beginning of the session, when I was talking, I told you how we're going to be speaking about the 3 different areas. So you're signposting your way all the way through so that people can follow what you're speaking about and that they can understand it. And when I was moving from talking about the audience, first of all, I spoke about planning the content, and that led me nicely into the second part of what I'm speaking about. So that there's that flow and it makes sense. People aren't lost wondering, what's she talking about? What's he saying now? I don't understand. Because when we stop understanding, we tune out, we stop listening. So you have got your structure there, and also from your structure, you're thinking about, how do I keep the audience engaged? How do I keep them listening to what it's going to be? And it can be something that could be a question that you ask. Could be a question that you ask that you're having audience participation, where they're actually giving an answer, whether that's in chat or whether that's in person and you're actually taking an audience answer. But it could be that you ask a question and you just leave a pause and you give them time to think. That pause can be very effective, and you're giving them time to think of what the answer is. It could be that you, instead of having text on your slide, that one slide comes up and it has an image on it. Could be that you're showing a short video, something that's a little bit different, that is going to get them engaged and switched on, staying focused to what you're talking about. So at this stage in your structure, you've got your 3 main points. This is the body of your presentation. And each point is almost like a standalone unit, so that you have the point where it has its own short introduction, that you're speaking about the point, you're backing it up maybe with a story, a statistic, that you're developing it further before you move on to your second point and then on to your third. So that's the core part, the main part of what you're speaking about. But a really important part of any presentation is, how do you get their attention at the beginning? And that opening that you're going to have, that's going to really get their attention. So if you remember from my opening, I put up the question on the slide and had you engaged by putting your answer into the chat, ABC, focusing in on the topic that we're talking about today for presentation skills. But you can also use a story, and there's a storytelling workshop, storytelling essentials workshop that I deliver, where we talk about 5 different levels of stories. So you've got different types of stories for different situations. But we've all been to the conference maybe where somebody is telling you the story about somebody they met the evening before, or their journey on the way there. They're building that connection with you straight away. Stories can be a very powerful way to open. It could be putting up an image on the slide, or it could be using that word imagine. Imagine that we are forward 5 years' time and the world has returned to normal, and what's that going to look like for you? Where would you be? What would you do? So you're getting people to journey in their imagination someplace. They're engaged, they're listening, they want to find out what you're going to speak about. Because we have people's attention most for that first 30 seconds when they start speaking. And if that time is spent talking about their qualifications, or people that they have worked with, or thanking the organizers for inviting them, people are switching off, stopping listening. So you need people to be paying attention straight off. Could be delivering a quote, asking a question, giving a statistic, or framing that statistic as a question. What percentage of people do you think are currently working from home? And in the audience mind, they're trying to think of what the answer is. So if I say, well, I'll give you the answer later on in my presentation, but today I'm going to speak to you about, and I give my introduction. I've got people's interest now because they want to find out later in the presentation, were they correct when they guessed whatever percentage? And I can call them back to that later on into my presentation and say, remember I asked you that question? How many of you got it right? So now they want to find out, was I right? So tricks like that can be used in the opening and then as a callback to get their attention later on. Second part of a talk when you've got people's attention is at the end. So you need to plan that. How are you going to have your ending? What's the last thing that they're going to remember? So it could be that you're giving a summary of the main points that you have. Could be that you're putting up an image again or a quote. Story can fit in very well there if it's something that's really inspirational or that you want them to remember this story at the end. Or it could be a simple call to action that you want them to connect with you on LinkedIn afterwards. And maybe that's the call to action that you have. But plan it. What is it going to be? So it's a deliberate part of your presentation and that it fits in with your presentation, that this is something that makes sense as a call to action. So that you have your overall structure there as having that hook at the beginning. What's going to grab their attention so they decide this is a useful way for me to spend my time listening to this speaker. You have the body of it divided into your 3 main points. Each point having the introduction, you're talking about it in more detail. Those blue arrows are very important because that's your transition. That's your moving from one piece onto the next very smoothly onto your third piece, and then your call to action at the end. And I've spoken to you there in the structure that you're thinking, how do I have engagement? But back to the poll that we had at the beginning, C was the most popular answer that people had for why people switch off. And C was in the way of the delivery. Now, if I have my preparation work done well, and I know who my audience is, I have put time putting my content together so that I can deliver that confidently, then it means that I can spend time working on my engagement. And in the virtual world that we're in now, we're not using our 5 senses. If we were in a room together, you know, you've got that buzz of conversation as you go into that conference room, for example, that, you know, there's the smell of coffee, that there might be a window opener, that aircon, and you can feel that breeze. All the different senses are there. At the moment, you've got what you can see and what you can hear on the screen from the presenter point of view. And that voice is a really important element of making sure that you're keeping people engaged. So when you're thinking about the voice, part of it is what pace are you speaking at? Because if I'm speaking really, really quickly, I'm going to have trouble for people to understand what I'm saying, especially if English isn't your first language. That pace that I spoke at is too fast. Even if English is your first language, if you're not from Ireland, my accent might be causing a difficulty. So you need to think about all of this. How do you speak at a rate that people are going to clearly understand what you're saying? Secondly, what's your volume like? Back to rate for a moment. Sorry, it just what I would suggest you do is record yourself and listen to it back and see, can each word be heard clearly? 120 is very often recommended as the number of words per minute. 120 is quite slow, probably this pace that I'm speaking at now. If I am speaking to a group in Ireland at a networking event, for example, I know that if I speak at 170, 180 words per minute, I can be clearly understood. For this audience here, I have deliberately slowed things down. And it's, again, thinking of your audience. Secondly is the volume. So have you got a good quality microphone that you can be clearly heard? If you are in an in-person event, if it's a small event and there's no microphone in the room, then can you be clearly heard in all corners of the room? That you're projecting your voice so that people at the far end of the room can hear you. If there is a microphone, do your tech check in advance. Make sure that all of that is working. Your quality of voice. If I speak to you in the same tone all of the time, you are going to fall asleep. So I need to vary the tone of voice that I'm using, the pace that I have, the pitch of voice that I have, so that there's variety in the way that I'm speaking and it's keeping people's interest. And another key thing that I can do, particularly if people have stopped listening or tuned out for a moment, is use pause. Because that's going to get people's attention straight back, even if it's just for them to see what's happened. Has my Wi-Fi gone? Has she stopped talking? People will pay attention if you're using pause. If I really want to emphasize a particular point that I'm making and I pause, it adds that extra emphasis. So it's a powerful tool to use. And another powerful tool is to really emphasize a particular word, highlight a particular word in a sentence. And I'm aware my image might not translate culturally across different places. So it's thinking about, for a highlighter, think about it when you are using that highlighter on the page, that you're drawing attention to a particular word on the page. When I emphasize a word vocally, I'm drawing that attention in the same way. So voice, hugely important. And the second sense that we have is what we can see. So making sure that you're using eye contact. And again, culturally, where I am culturally, you're trusted if you use eye contact. So we're building connection with people at eye contact. You're thinking about who the audience, specific audience is. From culturally, is that something that is expected, that there's eye contact? If it's a face-to-face situation, you make eye contact by looking around the room and engaging with different people around the room. When we're in a virtual world, it means that you're looking at your camera rather than looking at the screen where everybody is here. If I'm looking at you down here, I'm not creating that same impact as when I'm looking at you into the camera. It feels strange, it might not feel natural, but it does create a better impact the way that you're doing that. Another way that from your delivery and your engagement with people is thinking about your slide deck. First question always is, do you need a slide deck? If it's a short presentation, if it's very much story-based that you're talking about, then the slide deck can be creating a barrier between you and your audience. You will always have the option to move out of a slide deck. And remembering what I said about finding a way that you're going to get people's attention, moving out of your slide deck is going to do that. So think, do I need a slide deck first of all? If I do, how are people accessing it? Because some people here are going to be looking on their phones. So what size of font am I using? What colors am I using? Can I use image that's going to help rather than having text up on a screen? All of these different things, you're thinking about it again from your audience analysis point of view. How are they accessing it? Is the information that I'm sharing going to be better understood or better remembered if I use a slide deck? And if not, then maybe I don't need one. So you're thinking about all of these things in advance, part of that whole preparation that you're doing. So as we are moving through here, back to what we were talking about today, the ACE, we spoke about audience, first of all, audience analysis, at a very minimum, trying to see what information do they have already about the topic that I'm delivering, what do they need to know, and how can I bridge that gap in a way that they will understand and that's going to be at the correct level for them. Lots of technical detail if that's what's required, or very general if it's a general audience. For the C was content. How can I structure my content in a way that is easy for me to remember and easy for my audience to understand, that they will keep listening to what I'm saying, but also that I'm confident in my delivery of it so that I can deliver it well? How am I going to get their attention at the beginning for a good, strong opening? And what's my call to action? What do I want them to do at the end? And then finally, it's taking a look at what is the ways that I can engage the audience throughout so that they're listening and that they're paying attention. And I'm putting up my call to action at the end, which is the Let's Connect, and the options are there. Angela has already mentioned about the LinkedIn profile. LinkedIn is my platform of choice. So we have that. But back to the engagement. thinking about what are my slides going to look like? Are they going to be easy for somebody to look at on a phone or on a small screen? What's my voice and my vocal delivery going to be like? And am I making that eye contact? And just as I want to finishing at 10 to the hour here, so it gives us the 10 minutes of time for any questions that you have, any comments that you have, any sharing of best practice on that. So you can unmute to join in, or I know some of you don't have microphones there, so feel free to put them into the chat as well. And thank you for your time and your attention on that one.
Super, Maureen. Thank you so much. I'm sure everybody got a lot out of your presentation. It was very succinct and you covered a lot of things. So we leave it open now to all of you. If you have some specific questions for Maureen, or if you want to have some clarification, or if you have maybe a story of your own, which was maybe an appalling presentation experience or best practice, we'd be happy to hear from you all. Anybody want to make any comments? Just raise your hand or just speak.
Or put it into the chat. If you have a question there that you can put into the chat either.
Well, let me start with something.
Great.
It's not a story, but let's start with something. But when you spoke about presentations and you spoke about slides and the slide deck, I was thinking when we do a face-to-face presentation with a PowerPoint, for example, I also, when I finished my slide and I talk about the slide, I press B and it's blacked out at the end. So it's not visible. So I think we should remember that also for face-to-face presentations, that we black out the slides sometimes.
Thank you for that excellent reminder on that one. It's a point that I usually make when I'm delivering this as well. And it means that it's putting the attention on you, that you're taking the attention away from slides, because it doesn't matter what is on the slide, whether it's writing or whether it's an image. Our eyes are drawn to the slide all of the time. And if there is, for example, an audience question, the slide might not be relevant anymore. So move out of it and you're focusing all of the attention onto that audience member who's asked a question. Or it could be that you are, telling a story or giving extra information about something, and you want them to really pay attention to what you're saying. Then pressing that B on your laptop is a great way, in person or on a clicker. Very often those the clickers have the blackout button on that as well, and it creates that same impact as me jumping out of the slides when I was on the Zoom call there. So thank you for that contribution. Anybody else any comments to make? Any helpful tips or advice?
Maybe I have something. When you make a presentation, you need to make sure the engagement is with your client, for example, with something that they are familiar with. For example, if I know my client like golfing, I can make examples with golfing, something like that, right? Yeah. And to make sure we are not very technical when we explain something. That's what happened a lot in my team.
Mm-hmm. It is. Thank you for that. And that example of, using a hobby that they might be interested in, that's audience analysis. It's, for a large group, you're not going to be able to have similar hobby for everybody. But if you've got a large group now, that people are working from home or have been working from home, maybe starting to move back into the office. That's something that everybody has in common. And it's creating that bond with them. So you make reference to golf, or you make reference to something that they can connect with. That helps you with your presentation, definitely. So thank you for that. And the technical language, quite often we feel that we need to share our expertise by showing how much information we have. So I need to tell everything because I know so much about this topic, or I'm so qualified in this area. I want the audience to know everything about it. But what happens is people get confused. And when they get confused, they stop listening. So it really is important to keep it simple. If they want to know more information, then they can ask you questions, and then that gives you permission to share more expertise. But at the beginning, it's keeping it straightforward and simple until you know how much they need to know. Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions?
I do have a question or a saying maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Last week we had a presentation for an event, a large event for a motor company that are importing motorcycles, boats, whatever. We had to present the event, but how the event is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
I find it hard when I look at my notebook about things that you said about the opening and of course the closing, but there is a lot of content that should be in, but it's totally different. Maybe this is the center, or I mean, you said the opening, the content and the end. I mean, we had to follow what's going to happen in the event. We had to show them how the floor is going to look like, how the let's say the all the artists and the food and beverage and you know what is our concept for the event. So I find it a little bit hard to follow what you said here in building the presentation when you have to show an event and what's going to happen to present the idea.
Okay. So when you were saying there, one of the first things that popped into my mind is the opening that you could create there is using the word imagine. And if you say to them, imagine that it's, give a date, the date after the event, and what are the attendees talking about? And that it was such a wonderful event, how great the food was, how wonderfully organized it was, what the exhibition, so that you're something like that could start off as being a good opening to really get their attention. And then you're moving backwards to say, well, how do we get there? What's it going to look like? So that you're starting, what you have there is your chronological order, but it's a time-based, but you're starting in the future and then moving it back to where you are now and creating pictures for it. But it's taking a look from all of that content that you have to talk about. Can you block that into 3 areas? So for example, the preparation in one section, and then how that can be moved for a second category and a third category. Would that make sense for you to do it in that way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So something like that could work. Another challenge that people can have is if you've got a really large audience and they're from very diverse groups, and you need to be addressing all of them, but they've got different needs. So for example, a client that I was working with who was preparing to speak, this was pre-COVID, so he was preparing to speak at a conference in Spain. And it was about an app that he had developed, and he was very eager to get this app to market. And the 2 groups that were going to be at the conference were both potential clients for him. One was pharmaceutical based and the other was a patient body, a patient group, patient representative group. They have very, very different needs and very different reasons for using the app. And in his presentation, when he first came to me, he had it prepared. He was very technical and he was talking about lots of the technical details of this app. Patient body didn't care about that. What's their priority? So you're thinking, well, they're interested in making sure that confidentiality was going to be very important for the information that was going to be included in this app. What about for the pharmaceutical group? What was going to be important for them? So you're taking a look, in this case, we took a look from both groups. What's important to them? And then can we find something that is in common with both groups, and how can we tell the story? And we did tell the story, created the story around a patient who had been using this, and both groups could identify with what their role was in the story that we had created around the patient. But that can be a challenge if you've got very different groups in the audience. How can you make the content that you're saying relevant to both groups? Because they don't always have the same goals and objectives. So it's another aspect to consider. Any other comments or questions?
Hello, Maureen.
Hi.
Hi, this is Una.
Hi,
Yes, yes. I noticed about you talk about the jargons, right? You said we need some jargons for build up our like a professional side, but we also want to keep the audience like understanding and let them to know what we're talking about. But my question is, how do we design like get to this presentation? Like you mentioned, they ask your professional suggestions, right? We know what we're gonna be professional, but we may don't know the audience group. Like, so what are you suggesting we do some other steps before we start it? Yeah.
If when you know or you have a good idea of the profile of the audience, it makes it easy, but it's not always easy. So if it's a case that you don't have a lot of information, then you keep it very high level and you don't use that jargon or that terminology unless you have to. Sometimes it could be a case that there are acronyms or abbreviations of words. So at the beginning, the first time that you use it, that you explain what it is, so that if you are repeating that throughout, that you've explained it earlier on as to what it is, and that people know and understand. But when you don't have, if you only have very small amount of information about the audience, you're keeping it very general at that point. Does that answer your question, Una?
Yeah. Thank you, Mary.
Hey, have we anything else? That one? Angela, have you any questions? Anything that you would have noticed or anything that you would like to?
Can you, Maureen, give us a couple of fun ideas, if you can think of them, or maybe if anybody else in the room, of how to open a new business presentation with something fun.
So, and who's the audience, or what would your situation be? This is a challenge now, Angela. You really
Sorry.
So,
but actually, maybe even somebody else in the room has done this themselves. Maybe somebody else has it. So new business presentations, I think, by their nature, are quite boring, because you stand up and you have your deck, and you want to basically sell your company as a conference organizer to an association of cancer doctors, and they're about to meet 5 more people after you. And how do you make an impact when you first put that first slide up and make it personal? And one way could be that that you do something that's a little bit different, and it could be by not putting that first slide up. It could be by talking to them. It could be by giving an example of, the example that I mentioned a few moments ago, thinking about the conference is over and what's the attendee thinking. Imagine that. That can be a very strong way for people to fast forward and put themselves into a situation where it's all over. The relief is there. What's the first thing that you're going to do when this conference is over? If somebody's putting a lot of time and effort into organizing something, it could be that they're thinking, oh, when all this is over, I can't wait to whatever it's going to be. So maybe asking a question like that could start, but I'm sure people have examples of ones that they have seen that they'd like to share or that they've done themselves. Has anybody got anything there?
Did that answer your question, Angela?
Yeah, very good. Thanks a lot, Maureen.
And if we have any other examples, it's always good to learn from others. We have something popped into chat there. I need to move on. Okay, you're very welcome. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Actually, before everybody does just start dropping off the screen and leaving, because we are at 2, just after 2, I'd like to try and take a photograph, a screenshot. So if anybody who is currently off screen wants to stick their screens back on, I'll stick it on LinkedIn afterwards. So if there's anybody there, Michael, I don't know if you're still around. Claudia, yeah, you're all coming on now. That's great. A couple of more from eStar, and I will take this real quick. So prepare yourself to look pretty and smiling.
Think of that ice cream that the group were eating earlier. That's what I've been thinking of when I was saying, what are we looking forward to? I'm looking forward to having ice cream after this.
Me too,
I put my
actually.
LinkedIn details into the chat there. I'll be happy to connect with you afterwards. So
Super, thanks a lot, Maureen. Okay, I'm going to take a picture. Bear with me. Okay, very good.
great.
Thanks so much, Maureen. I think it was a super session, very, very interesting, and a great way to kick off our INCON Learning Month. And I do hope that many of you will be back in touch with Maureen to learn from her some more. And next week we have Giuseppe Mayer from AIM Group, and he's going to talk about design and brand. And that's on Wednesday, the 28th. And if you haven't already registered, you can do it on the INCON website. On the top of the INCON website, you have summer learning, and you can just click there. So thanks a lot, everybody.